Is the life that you want just outside of your reach? Do you feel that you just can't quite get to it? Did you know that fear is the one thing that often blocks people from their success, blocks people from being in the life that they want? Did you know that? So, my name is Benjamin Blackett, and I'm a life mastery consultant at a creative healing place. And what I'd like to tell you is I believe that there are 3 things that are really important to know about fear. The first of those things is this: successful people, all the successful people you've ever run across, they have fear. And you know what? They have fear, and they kind of get through it and do it anyhow, whatever the it is. I'm going to tell you about a story about that in just a minute. Second thing is, the life that you want is just outside of your comfort zone. And when it's outside of your comfort zone, that means that there's fear standing in your way. So the third thing to tell you about fear is that fear doesn't mean that you can't do a thing. Fear just simply means that you haven't done it yet, that you are at the edge of your comfort, right? So I'd like to share with you a little story about some fear that I had that was pretty intense and pretty powerful, and a great example of a story about how this all ties together, right? So it was a few years ago now. I was in the south of France, and I had this idea that I wanted to go paragliding. Now, up until this point, being in the south of France this particular day, this idea of paragliding sounded like a great idea way out there somewhere that I would probably never get to. And I thought, yeah, I want to do that, but sometime. But then I made a decision. I made a decision to go for this effort at making a paraglide. And so I made an appointment with a paragliding school to go ahead and do the deal. And the place that I was going to go paragliding was an hour drive from the hotel that I was staying at. And this was, I was staying in a little town just called Pont de Vallon, the south of France. I don't remember the name of the town that I paraglided in, but it was an hour drive. So I get in my car, and I'm starting to drive to the place where I'm doing this, and all of a sudden I notice, like, every 5 minutes I'm starting to hyperventilate. I'm like, oh my god, what am I doing? My fists are clenching the steering wheel. I'm like, okay, breathe, just breathe, you'll be okay. And then I'd start hyperventilating again another 5 minutes later. And then, I got much closer to where I was going to be doing this jump, essentially, off of the side of a mountain into flying free in the air. And about 45 minutes into my drive, I'm starting to say to myself, don't turn the car around, just keep going. Don't turn the car around, just keep going. And I arrive at the first place that I thought I was supposed to meet the people who were taking me paragliding, and it's the wrong address. There's nobody there. And so I call up the people. I'm like, this is where I arrived. This is where you told me to go. They're like, oh, no, that's the wrong place. You went to the wrong place. You got to come back down the road and go this way and take this turn. I don't remember the directions exactly, but I tried to do what I thought they said, and I did not follow the directions correctly, and I had to call them up again and say, I'm sorry, I don't know where I am. They said, well, describe where you are to us and we'll come meet you. So I did, and they did come meet me. And I was like, what? Like, all the time, like, I've got this fear. Like, there's this fear going on, right? And I'm like, well, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this kind of thing? Part of me is like, why am I doing this? So they come get me, and they take me to what they call l'atterrissage, which is the landing field for where people are landing. They're paragliders who have been jumping off the mountain way up there somewhere and coming down, landing on the landing field in front of me. Which I thought, now that's pretty clever, because I'm watching these people land and I'm seeing, well, they're landing pretty easily and it doesn't look too difficult. Maybe I could do that. But still, I'm brand new to paragliding. It's something I had never done before, and I was like, what am I doing? And I'm looking at the mountain that people are jumping off, and it's way up in the distance, and I'm seeing all these paragliders come down. I'm like, I'm gonna do that, I'm saying to myself. And then after a while sitting and watching these people land on the field in front of me, the guy who runs this paragliding school says, okay, everybody into the Jeep, and he piles 8 of us into the Isuzu Jeep with a big rack on top of it that's loaded with parachutes. And mind you, I'm in the south of France. French is not my native tongue. I do speak French, but it's not my native tongue. And I've got all this fear going on inside of my head, right? And so then we start up the mountain, and it's a road going up the mountain that is as wide as the car that we're in, and that's it. So if anybody comes down at us, I don't know what happens. That didn't happen, but I don't know what happens. About 3/4 of the way up the mountain, all these people are all talking in French, and I'm like, I don't even know what they're saying. I don't know what's going on. I'm going in tandem with somebody when I do this paraglide, but I don't know who my pilot is. I end up sitting next to him. I didn't even know I was sitting next to him. I'm listening to conversation, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm terrified. Why am I doing this? And so we get to the top of the mountain, and we open up the car doors, and they start loading the parachutes out of the rack on top and start directing people at what's called the runway. And I look down outside of the car, and down on the right, it's a straight drop down, just off the side of the road. And then on the other side of the road is what's called the runway. And the runway is 45 degrees, deep slope, and it's about 50 feet long. Maybe a couple of feet longer, but about 50 feet. See that? See where those feet are? It's no farther than that away from where the end of the runway is. And so 45-degree slope. And my pilot says to me, okay, I'm going to get you all hooked up here, and he lays out the parachute, and he gets me clipped into a harness thing, and he gets him clipped into a harness thing, and he clips both of us to the parachute. He said, okay, now we have to wait. I was like, what? Why do we have to wait? He said, well, there's not too much wind today, and we might be too heavy. I'm like, what? Sorry, that just cracks me up. I have to stop this. I'm like, what? So he says, yes. Now, in the meantime, he had already told me, so when it's time to go, what you're going to have to do, 45-degree slope, right? Straight down. I'm like, what's going on? He said, when I tell you, you're going to take a couple of steps ahead, you're going to stop, and the parachute's going to lift up above us. And he said, when I tell you after that, you're going to run as fast as you can, leaning all the way downhill. Don't lean back, don't sit back, don't do anything except keep running until I tell you to stop. And that won't be till after your feet are off the ground and we're in the air. And that far away, I'm looking at the end of the runway. I'm like, okay. But then he made me wait for 12 and a half minutes. And I'll tell you what, that was the longest 12 and a half minutes of my life. And so then he says, okay, take a couple of steps. I'm like, okay. Mind you, this is all in French. And he says, okay, run. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, my heart is pounding in my chest, and I run and I run and run, and all of a sudden we're off the ground, and we're up in the air, and we're flying, and I'm like, oh my God, this is just unbelievable. This is so cool. And when I tell you, it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, because there I was all of a sudden up in the air with this pilot, this parachute, and there was no sound. It was just us and the wind. And the pilot was so generous and so kind. He gave me about a 40-minute flight, and we went up, and we went this way and that way. We went on both sides of the mountain. He showed me Avignon off in the distance. It was incredible. Now, why do I share this story with you? And why do I share this with you having to do with 3 important things to know about fear? Well, the first thing I said is that all successful people have fear, right? All successful people have fear, and they get through it. And so as you heard the story, you heard that I had that fear going on, and it wanted to talk me out of doing this whole experience. And if had I listened to the fear and listened to it loudly enough, I could have talked myself right out of missing that whole thing. And the thing is that it was one of the most freeing, most beautiful experiences in my life, and it was one of the most terrifying things to go ahead and go for it. So I had this success, right? And it was a massive success. I felt like, you feel like God when you're up there flying in the sky. You just feel like it. All the land looks little, it's quiet, it's calm. Like, you just feel so powerful. I felt so powerful. Maybe you don't, but I did. So that's the first thing. I had that fear, and there was a way that I was like, okay, that's the fear. And the other thing, the next thing in my mind was that, the fear, all it was telling me is like, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. What do you think you're doing? Why? And you heard me say that in the story, right? You can't do this, you can't do that. Why do you think you can do that? And the truth is that the fear may be saying that, but that's not what the fear means. It doesn't mean that I can't do the thing. It doesn't mean that you can't do the thing. The fear simply meant that I just hadn't done it yet. I just hadn't done it yet. And then the third thing now I know I told these to you in different order, but the third thing was that there was this life that I wanted. I wanted to be able to paraglide. I wanted to know that was something that I had done in my life. This was a bucket list item I made for myself, and I know that by the time I died, I wanted to have had the experience of paragliding. And I'll tell you what, there was this part of me that knew that had my name on it. That had my name on it. And I wanted it more than anything. And so where was that life, that I got that freedom, that I got that experience you heard me telling you about? It was so beautiful. It was magnificent. I wish I could show you pictures of what it looked like being in that paraglider. And the conversation I was having with my pilot, where he was telling me what it took to fly a paraglider and how the wind works, which I didn't know any of this stuff right when I started. But it was great. Where was it? It was just outside of my comfort zone. It would have been comfortable to stay back in the hotel. It would have been comfortable to take a drive around the country and not go to that airfield and do that flight, right? That would have been comfortable. But my true life, my true adventure was right outside that comfort zone. And boy, I'm telling you what, I am so glad that I live a life where I step outside my comfort zone. And that's just one story I got about that. So, the 3 important things to know about fear. All successful people have fear. They deal with fear. They face fear. They get through it. Second thing, the life you want is right on the other side of that fear. The third thing is fear doesn't mean you can't do a thing. You can't be a thing. You can't have a thing. It just means you haven't yet. I hope you find this helpful. And what I'd like to know from you is there a time in your life, is there an adventure you got through where you know that there was an amount of fear that you faced? Love to hear the story. Comment down below. I'm interested to hear.